Good evening, everyone. It is 6:45 just about on Friday, and I'm glad that the week is over, aren't you? I'm glad that all of us got it through this week, and our weekend is about to start, and one less week in June. 4th of July is just around the corner, and before you know it, it'll be December. That's usually how things go. So tonight, as you obviously know by now, because of the title of the video, tonight we are comparing the Neumann NDH 20 against the Mr. Speaker Ether C Flow. And I assume that most, if not all of you, already know about the Ether C Flow, but let me just very quickly give you a rundown. The Ether C Flow is a slightly modified version of the original Ether C, now, which is itself a closed back version of the Ether headphones, which are open back. Excuse me. There have been some driver tweaks from Mr. Speaker that were implemented into the Ether closed version, and the Ether C Flow, it doesn't really have any driver tweaks as far as I can tell. The only portion that is changed is this padding that is now included with the packaging. And these are inserts that you put behind the ear pads that help dampen the sound and theoretically help sculpt the sound to emphasize a particular range of frequency. Does it work? It does. It's not my favorite way of doing things, but it does, in fact, work. And there are several levels of padding that you can get, and you can insert the padding to your liking as much or as little as you want. And so that's really what the Ether C Flow, the flow portion, is. The Ether C are fabulous headphones. I was so lucky to find a pair used on eBay, and I am glad I got it. The only problem I have with my Ethers is that the headband itself is the right portion of the headband that ratchets up and down is a little loose, so I had to put some Scotch tape to hold it in place. And I could send this over to Mr. Speakers, who are in San Diego, and they will take care of it and send it back to me. But it's not one of those issues that I really care about. The headphone itself works great, and I don't know if I want to lose the headphone for the next month or so until they fix it. But that's the only problem. They're incredibly comfortable headphones. The padding is fantastic. The ear pads are fantastic. They're so soft and supple. They are not light headphones, but they don't feel heavy once you put them on. They completely sit around my ears, in contrast with the Neumanns, which sit pretty much on my ears, the top and bottom of my ears. The clamping force between these two headphones, I would say the Neumanns are slightly more clampy than the Ethers. But again, that's a personal preference. The clamping force of the Neumanns is definitely not hurtful. It doesn't irritate me, despite the fact that some people have commented that the comfort of the Neumanns leaves a lot to be desired. If you go and watch Zios's review, he makes that commentary, and then there are people in the comments on his video that agree with him. Look, don't take that to heart. Everybody's comfort level is different. I completely disagree with Zios when he says these are uncomfortable or only comfortable for a couple of hours. I don't think that's true, for me at least. And those people that complained about the comfort and they said that it was among the least comfortable headphones they've ever had, or they don't believe that it would be comfortable, have no idea what the hell they're talking about. That's not true. So let's put that aside. All right, we are about to start the test. And before I go, I want to, what is going on? So I've had this song on, The Sloth by Jacob Shea. I don't know why this has been on, but it was in the background. It got a little loud. So before we actually get right into it, here's the parameters of this test. So we want to know which headphone is more flat, more neutral, and that's probably going to be a little bit difficult to know because we're just comparing between the two. We don't have a control right? We don't have a standard headphone that we can say this is what flat sounds like. We're trying to find which is the more flat of the two that we could then say this is now a standard. That's a little tough to do, but we're going to try to muddle through it and do the best we can. As I've said in the actual review, and I'm trying to get all the chords together here. As I've said in the mids and bass review of the Neumanns, I think the Neumanns are bass neutral. They're not emphasized. They're not really light. I hear the bass, and it's good. It's a refreshing to hear drum strikes and not be overwhelmed by them. It's also nice to have a pair of headphones that reproduces drums, I would say naturally, and not in a visceral way. Bass is really easy to overdo, and it's overdone on many, many headphones because that's an easy way to get people to buy your headphones because that's what we listen to. Unfortunately, Beats has ruined the flavor of headphones, flavor of bass, really, because now people who wear Beats headphones, Apple earbuds, Bose, all that sort of stuff, they have this more warm, very narrow frequency range. And they don't get to understand that there is much more that is being left out of their listening experience. So it's easy for headphone manufacturers to cater to that crowd and not put in the effort to accurately reproduce the entire frequency range without coloring it. Anyway, I don't believe that the Neumanns color the bass. Our test yesterday determined, I think it's true, that the Neumanns do in fact have somewhat recessed midtones, and the mid frequency is not in line with all the others. I think it's probably a little recessed, especially for female vocalists. As far as male vocalists, the one song that had a male vocalist on it, it seemed to be a little bit further ahead, but based upon just one song, I can't say for sure. Now let's do the test. Let's go forward. Let's go to the test playlist. And the first thing I want to do is I want to test the low rumble and then the complexity of a song. We're going to start with Mountains. So we're going to start the first 30 seconds of Mountains, and we're going to skip ahead to about halfway into the song when the organ and all the instruments come in. What I want to know is, how is the bass reproduced? Is there definition and clarity amongst all the instruments? And is there soundstage? That's what we're going to look for. I have the Neumanns on, plugged into my AB switch, which is then plugged into the Monolith THX desktop. Here we go. I can hear everything fine on the Neumanns. There's plenty of detail in this song. The click, click, click that starts very early in the song. And then there's the string instruments that come in about 15 seconds. Very slow build up. There's no emotion to the song. It's very restrained. Almost as if you're listening to it at half volume, even though this is max volume on Spotify and negative 18.5 on the amp, which is very loud. Let's skip ahead to about halfway. And at this is right now where all the instruments come in, and the organ is supposed to just hit its crescendo. About 2 minutes into the song, the organ just comes straight out with all its gusto, its power, and it should be the central portion of this piece. Unfortunately, with the Neumanns, that's not how it's represented. There's a lot of emotion that's inside this organ. Hans Zimmer purposefully created the song around the organ. And if you watch the documentary on Interstellar, there's this whole 15-20 minute bit about how Hans created this theme. And he was talking about the organ being the emotional aspect, and they had to go to this one church with the biggest organ they could find, and they had to record there. Unfortunately, with the Neumanns, I get no emotion. Even though right at 2 minutes when that organ comes in with all the instruments, it's supposed to evoke awe, and it doesn't. Furthermore, at 2 minutes, let me go back real quick. I'm going to increase the volume, and I think what happens is that there's not a whole lot of definition within all the pieces of the song. There is soundstage, there is separation of instruments, but it's not defined. Let me explain. So separation and definition, I think, are different in my mind. Separation means you hear instrument 1 and you hear instrument 2 and then you hear instrument 3. You know there are 3 distinct instruments in this particular portion. That's separation. Not separation would be you hear some muddling of multiple instruments and you can't tell what's what. The Neumanns don't do that. The Neumanns do separate instruments. Definition is hearing each particular instrument with emphasis, meaning you can tell what that instrument is doing, and it's got its own tone and its own tenor and its own vibrancy and its own impact. That's what I mean by that. So separation, yes, but definition, no. I can hear that there are multiple instruments, but I just can't tell you what those instruments are. Well, first of all, what they are and what they're doing. The volume, again, just seems so muted. It's negative 18.5, and I could crank it up higher, and that's unfortunate if I have to do that. If I have to crank it up higher, that means that these headphones need to be driven harder, and I know that's not true. And it's not really that these headphones need to get louder. They don't. It's just that everything just seems so muted. Lack of emotion. Let's switch to the ethers and let's compare. Okay, got the ethers on, and I haven't worn these things in a while. Up front, I can tell you that the ethers have less sound isolation than the Neumanns. So if that is important to you, if you don't want to be distracted from the outside by the outside, the Neumanns are a better choice. It's the clamp force and it's the type of pads that Neumann uses. The ethers are much more comfortable to wear, but I can also hear everything that's going on outside. Let's start. Here we go. So the beginning of the song sounds practically the same as it did on the Neumanns. I really can't tell a difference between the two. I'm going to skip ahead to about halfway. The organ is about to come in about 5 seconds with all the instruments. Yep. Separation and better definition on the ethers. There's no doubt about it. It's immediately apparent to me. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase the volume. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to. I'm going to increase the volume to about negative, let's do negative 15. You know what? I went negative 14. So negative 18.5 on both initially. They both sound a little quiet, but I heard more definition on the ethers. Let's go back to about 2 minutes, and I want to hear that crescendo again on the ethers. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the Neumanns. And we're going to go back to 2 minutes. Again, the volume has been increased to negative 14. I'm going to switch back to the ethers, because you may not like what I'm about to say, or you may like what I'm about to say. It all depends on your perspective. This is the ethers. So I had to increase the volume for the ethers to negative 6 because I couldn't, at negative, what was it, 14? On negative 14, the Neumanns suddenly jumped up in volume, and the ethers simply didn't follow suit. The ethers were still muted compared to the Neumann. So I cranked it up to negative 6 for the Neumann, and now it seems to be at about the same parity. So I had to put the ethers at negative 6 decibel to get about the same volume as I was getting on the Neumanns at negative 14. There you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control master volume through Spotify. I'm just going to leave it at negative 6, and then I'm just going to try to work with it that way. Okay, so what have I learned? There's more soundstage on the ethers. And it feels that there is a little bit more definition on the ethers as well. Now, at higher volume, when you crank up on the Neumann, that definition starts to come out more than it did at lower volume. But when the volume is then closely matched, as I've tried to do at this point, the ethers are they have more soundstage and they have more definition to the separated instruments. That's what I hear. Now that doesn't mean that the Neumanns are exponentially worse. I don't think that's the case. I just don't think that the Neumanns reproduce all the frequency and the tonality as clearly as the ethers do. But it's a difference of it's a very minor difference. And that's not bad if you really think about it, because the ether C flows go for I think $1,500 or $1,600, and the Neumanns are being sold for $500. And if you're talking about just minor differences, hey, you're just saving yourself $1,000 easily, right? But that's just song one. Let's move on to the next one. Let's go to Haim, Want You Back. This is supposed to be vocal centric, and the instruments are supposed to support the vocals. I have the ethers on, -6 on the monolith. Her voice sounds so darn natural. I could hear a little bit of the crackle in her voice, which is very natural and realistic. It sounds so wonderful on the ethers. There's clear separation amongst all three vocalists. And now all the instruments are in, the guitar and the drum. So the sound is fairly, it's not flat, that's not what I mean to say. The vocals are ahead of the instruments, as I believe they should be for this song, but it's not so far ahead that you lose context of what's going on with the instruments. So if we're talking about a stage, then the vocalists are near the front, and the instruments are probably 3 steps right behind them. That's not a big separation. So there seems to be either the midtones are pretty much neutral on the ethers, or the bump is not significant. Either way, it sounds really good because all of it is coming through crystal clear. I can hear her breathing at about 1 minute and 58 seconds. She takes a breath, and that sharp, as she takes in a breath to start the next series of words that she's going to sing, that's a really good micro detail this headphone reproduces. The bass is not overpowered. I would say that the bass response is rather flat for the ethers. There's no impact of the drums, which is fine if all you're doing is trying to critically listen. As far as the entirety of the song, there's no peakiness, no muddiness, no gradiness. The vocals do come out absolutely beautifully, very clear. And I would say, if we're talking about subjective preference, then this is as analytical as I would want a pair of headphones to be. Any more analytical, then it will lose the passion, the warmth behind the song. And the ethers are not warm headphones. They're not dark headphones. They're a little bit colder and close to neutral, if not neutral. I mean, nothing can be really perfectly neutral. Okay, so let's switch to the Neumanns. And let's start this again. Ouch. Ouch. So it's a little peaky for some strange reason. It got a little sibilant. And at higher volume, it just kind of peaks too much. Now, if you look at the volume slider on the bottom right, I will stop it at where I think it was equal, or it would be equal to the ethers. I don't think that the vocals are as well separated on the Neumanns as they are in the ethers. And there's not as much soundstage on the Neumann. It just sounds like more of a more dark headphone than when you compare it to the ether. The ether has this grander scale to it. It seems a bit wider on the soundstage than the Neumann. In a few seconds, she's going to stop and take a breath. And let's see if I can hear it. Yeah. So I heard her take a breath, which is I think 1 minute and 55 seconds, 158, something like that. It wasn't the same as with the ethers. The ethers really made it come out. The Neumanns, because I was looking for it, I was waiting for it. I knew when on the song precisely when it would be coming. I heard it. But if I wasn't paying any attention, I would just gloss over it. But with the ethers, that's a micro detail that does get shoved, that does get pushed up so that you can hear it. Now, when I say pushed up, I don't mean that it's forcing it. I just mean that it's there, it's present. It is a detail that is easy to find. Whereas with the Neumann, I have to listen because it's less prevalent. It sounds muted. The vocals are not as forward on the Neumann as they are on the ether. And it just sounds more flat against the instruments. So if we're back to the stage, I said on the ethers that the vocalists are near the front, and then the instruments are like 2 or 3 steps up like that right behind them. With the Neumann, they're basically, pretty much lined up straight, shoulder to shoulder. That's how I would describe it. So is there possibly a mid-bass, not a mid-bass, but a mid-frequency boost on the ethers? Potentially, maybe that's the case. But I'm also getting something different from the Neumanns, which is a lot of muteness throughout. It's more closed off. It doesn't have the same soundstage, and it doesn't have any real sparkle to the song. Now, you may be happy with not having sparkle. You may be happy not having any real excitement to the song, and if that's the case, great. The ethers actually do provide a bit more energy to the song in all the ways I've already described. I'm going to skip over Angel because neither of these two headphones have a very good, I'm not going to say good. Neither of these headphones have an unnatural bass response. And in order to enjoy songs like Angel, you probably want headphones that are tuned for strong bass reproduction. Neither of these headphones is tuned for strong bass reproduction. Let's go to Scherzo for X-Wings and see how these headphones do with orchestral. I have the Neumanns on. Okay, I'm switching to the ethers. The ethers have more energy to the song. They're wider. There's more soundstage. They have more presence to each instrument. So there's separation, and then there's the presence to the instruments. It's more articulate. I can hear each particular note that these instruments give. Whereas compared to the Neumann, I hear it, but it's so muted. I miss a lot of that detail on the Neumann, whereas on the ether, the detail is coming out. And it's really sparkly and great and energetic, and the micro detail is right in front of me, and I don't have to go hunting for it. How do I explain it? Why is this happening? Well, my first hypothesis would be because the ethers have a bigger sound stage, they have more air to the song, there's more of it for the headphone to work with, right? It's utilizing it in a bigger swath of the frequency range, and is digging deep into that frequency to bring out the tonality. That's all vague. I know, I understand that there's nothing concrete about what I said. But imagine, let's try to give you a hypothetical. Imagine that you are standing next to a pond, right? You're at the bank of the pond, and you step your foot into the pond, and the first step you take into the pond, your toes get wet. You take another step, and then your ankles get wet, and then another step, and then your entire foot is submerged. And then you take another step, and now half your leg is submerged. Okay? Imagine that is what sound depth is. The Neumanns take me to about ankle deep. And the ethers take me about half leg deep. That's how I describe what I'm experiencing. There is so much more to the song being represented on the ethers compared to the Neumann. The instruments on this song just have more energy to it and more definition to it. Now, when they're about the same volume, I'm hearing it at the same volume, but I'm not feeling it like I feel it with the ethers. When you're listening to an orchestral or an instrument-heavy song, the whole point is for you to get immersed and feel like you're surrounded by that music. What helps get that impression is if you have wide soundstage, you have separated instruments, so there's no muddiness, no graininess, and you have definition to the instruments, meaning each instrument has its own particular tone and frequency, and there's a separate frequency. You may not be able to tell what the instrument is, but that's okay. But that there is a separate frequency for that separate instrument. The ethers help with that. The ethers really do define it that way. They display it that way. Now let me go back to the Neumann. Let's go back and repeat the first 30 seconds. It's good reproduction on the Neumann, but there's not as much soundstage as with the ethers. It's not as deep sounding as I described it to you with the pond analogy. Is it muddy? No, it's not muddy. It's not grainy. It's not. It's a bit more peaky than it was on the ethers, and the energy seems to be about the same as the ethers, but because of that wider soundstage, I feel as if the ethers display that energy better. Like it's digging deeper into the song to produce it with some emotion. The Neumanns are more closed off. Okay, that's there you go. The Neumanns are more closed off. The ethers are more open. Now the differences I'm talking about, the definition, and one's more defined than the other, the instruments, blah blah blah. Is it a night and day difference? No, I wouldn't say it's night and day. Both headphones reproduce music nicely. They have their own tonality though. So the ethers are pretty analytical, or at least as analytical as I want them to be. They are wide, whereas the Neumanns they just seem darker to me. They're certainly more closed off than the ethers. It was like if you go back, excuse me, if you go back and you watch the review I did, the comparison between the LCD2 closed versus the M1060C, that's basically what I was saying, that the M1060C sounds more closed off, sounds darker versus the 2 closed, which has more air to it, more breath to it. That's a night and day difference. These two is not a real night and day difference, but if you go A and B, I can say that the ethers tend to have a more wide presentation to the songs. This is the third song, and this is consistent again. Once is just an observation. Twice is a coincidence. 3 times, now you've got a trend. And there seems to be a trend. But we can keep going, and let's find out if there is a trend. But before we do, I need to go get some water, so hold on a minute, huh? All right. We have returned. The Neumanns are back on my head. What else should we try? Let's go to superposition because that has male vocals. Neumanns are on my head, and I'm going to turn the volume down to about 75% on Spotify. Here we go. The drums are well reproduced on the Neumanns. There's no real impact. So it's not boomy. It's not muddy. It's just there. And that's what you want in a neutral type headphone. You just want the bass to be represented. You don't want it to impact the rest of the song. You don't want to overemphasize it. And then I think they do a very good job. When the male vocalist comes in about 25 seconds or so into the song, he is slightly ahead of the other instruments, but not by a whole lot. And I wouldn't say that his voice gets mixed into the other instruments, that it gets lost, but it's not as forward as I would like it to be. And I hear too much of the instrument when he is singing. I would prefer to hear him more than I would prefer to hear the instruments when he's singing. But again, this is all subjective to the extent that that's my preference. I want to hear the vocals. Some people don't want to hear the vocals. Some people would rather listen to the beat. That's fine. But that's not my first of all, that's not my expectation, and second of all, that's not my preference. So when the Neumanns don't give it to me that way, I kind of get a little disappointed. But that doesn't mean the song is reproduced poorly. It's not. It sounds fine. There's no gratiness, no peakiness, there's no muddiness, there's nothing wrong with the way that it's being presented. It just doesn't satisfy me as somebody who enjoys listening to music compared to somebody who wants to mix or master or produce music. Let's switch to the ethers and start again. Yeah, I think that the ethers sound better. There's more air to the song, to this song on the ethers than it was on the Neumanns. Bigger soundstage. The vocal comes out stronger on the ethers than they did on the Neumann. And once again, just like with Haim, it's not like they're shoulder to shoulder. On the ethers, it's always as if the vocalists are 2 or 3 steps ahead of the other instruments. So it's not a huge bump in the mids, but it's enough for me to be satisfied with the reproduction. All subjective preference. It's crisp, it's nice, it's analytical. What's the difference between these two headphones on this song? Well, the biggest difference for me, there are two things. One is subjective, the other one is much more objective. The subjective thing is I prefer the vocal representation on the ethers versus the Neumanns because of everything I just said about it. The objective thing is that the ethers have a wider soundstage. And if you want wide soundstage between these two headphones, the ethers win. And they win 4 out of 4 now. Without reservation. It's not murky. It's not, it's possibly a little bit bigger. It's demonstrably bigger. A and B test, noticeably bigger. Let's keep going. There's a point at this song. Let me get to the exact time. 35 seconds, starting at 35 seconds, he says, but. And when he starts with the letter B, and he's going, but, it's grainy, and it's dirty, and it sounds rough. And it's a micro detail that comes out, and it sounds really nice on the ethers. You have to go and listen to it at 35 seconds and tell me that you hear it. If you hear it, then you've got good headphones. If you don't hear it and you don't hear the graininess and the rough, if you don't hear it in that way, your headphones are probably not reproducing that micro detail. And it's just a brief second, but when he's saying but, it's that graininess, and I love to hear that type of micro detail. Let's switch to the Neumanns. Now we know where we're looking for, right? So we're already biased. We're already biased knowing it's at 35 seconds, and we know what the word is, and we know exactly how it's supposed to be represented. So now let's find out if it is the exact same representation. there is that roughness to his voice when he says that word. So I'm going to listen to it again, switch the ethers, listen to it, and then I'll talk. So there's going to be some silence for a few moments. Between the two, on that micro detail, the ethers have a more natural representation, in my opinion, of that graininess and rough voice. The Neumanns do, in fact, reproduce that micro detail. I mean, especially when I know where to look, and I am looking for it. But it is not as well defined as on the ethers. Now, you could say that's your subjective opinion. As long as they're showing that detail, what does it matter? Yeah, you could say that. Certainly that is one way to look at it, and you are totally entitled to say that. But if you're sitting there, and I'm just imagining this, let us pretend for a moment that I know something about sound engineering. I don't, but let's pretend. And I hear this graininess in the voice. I may want to boost it a little bit, right? I may say, I like that. Let's try that again. And I'm going to try to pinpoint that frequency at that precise moment, and I'm going to just give it a slight nudge because I want that graininess to come out. If you go with the Neumanns, you're probably going to add a little bit too much. Maybe it's a hair's breadth. But to some people who have particular types of headphones that reproduce, that have a bumped up mid-range, that's going to be too much. But if you're mastering or you're mixing with the ethers, you may not want to add any more. And it might just be the perfect amount, because it already represents it. Now, you could say that for almost any headphone. You could say, well, if you have a pair of headphones that is bumped up in the mids, you might miss the detail. That is true. If it's bumped up in the mids, you might miss adding the detail, and other people may not get it if they don't have a bumped up mid bass, or I keep saying mid bass, don't have a bumped up mid frequency. So yes, the reverse argument is also equally possible. But if we're stuck between these two headphones, and this is all we're comparing, what's your preference? Is your preference to have a pair of headphones that you know you're going to have to keep adding something? Or is your preference to have a pair of headphones where you're less likely to add? What do you prefer? Do you prefer to EQ more into a song, or do you prefer to EQ down a song? Now you may say there's no difference. I still have to EQ. Okay, there's no difference then. And if you're going to go by that, if you're going to say there is no difference, then the corollary is there is no difference between these headphones, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. The bad thing is for the ethers that at $1,500 to $1,600, those headphones at MSRP, those headphones are not leagues ahead of something that costs $500 from Neumann. And it's good for the Neumann because the Neumann can keep pace with ethers that cost $1,000 more. Right? If you're saying there's no difference. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that it can be said there is no difference. I think there is a difference, and I think there's a noticeable difference. more soundstage, more depth to the frequency that's being reproduced, more naturalness to the frequency on the ethers, and the micro details just seem to come out better, more pronounced on the ethers compared to the Neumann. The question really comes down to you. How much are those differences worth to you? Is it worth an additional $1,000? I cannot answer that question for you. Is it worth waiting another 5 months, 6 months, however long it's going to take for you to save up that extra cash, and instead of buying the Neumanns, buying the ethers with all the other issues that may come with the ethers? Not as solid build quality, the marked up price, obviously, the fact that you've got to get well, you don't really have to get special headphone cables for the ethers. The ethers will work with any headphone cable that take that connection. You have to get special headphone cables for the Neumanns, because the Neumanns have that twist lock mechanism I showed you in my unboxing, which is very hard to find, by the way. I haven't found one yet. What is next? What should we do next, you think? I don't know. You want to go to real micro details? We go to New Light if we want to go to real micro details. Because New Light is a very ambiotic. Not ambiotic. It's not what I meant to say. It's not being born. Okay, it's not in the womb. It's not ambiotic. There's a lot of ambiance. That's what I meant to say. It's ambiance to this music. It's ambiance music. The micro details in New Light by Kazuki, by the way. If you get a chance, go to Bandcamp, check them out. Or on Spotify. That's cool too. The thing with New Light is that you can hear the wind and the rustling of either it's wheatgrass or it's grass. I mean, is there a difference? Wheatgrass or it's grass? Do they make different sounds? I don't know. You can hear the birds. You can hear this haunting, soothing string or violin or instrument, something in the background. Really nice micro details if you pay attention. So that's what we're going to pay attention to. I have the Neumanns on my head. Here we go. I am switching to the ethers. So that haunting music in the background is a little bit more pronounced on the ethers than it was on the Neumann. And I think there's more micro detail that comes out on the ethers. So let's go back. I think it was about 18 seconds or so. So let me start again. Yeah. So between 11 seconds and 14 seconds, it sounds like the micro detail, it's like somebody walking in tall grass. It's like you hear the crunching of grass, this dry grass under your feet. That's what I hear between 11 and 14 seconds. And it's quite easily discernible on the ethers, even though that background music is pronounced. That's a feat, right? I mean, that's quite a thing for a driver to do. Now you're dealing with two very different types of frequencies playing at the same time with all the other stuff that's going on in the song. There's a lot going on, a lot mixed in. And yet, everything has its own definition. Everything has its own particular tonality. And it's easier to find it on the ethers. Now let's go back and let's switch to the Neumanns. This is tough because now I have to try to not bias myself, even though I'm going to go back exactly to the moment where I'm supposed to listen to this. Here we go, Neumanns. Yeah, the Neumann certainly produced that micro detail, just not as well defined as the ethers. And the ethers are wider. They sound like there's more air to them. It just sounds so much more natural and fulfilling to listen to this song on the ethers because it gives you so much depth. It sounds like with the Neumanns, it sounds like you're just kind of you're stuck in a room with very nice speakers, but you're stuck in a room. You're not going to get the same experience as if you're standing outside and listening to the same pair of speakers. Now, some people may prefer to have that indoor experience. Other people might prefer to have that outdoor experience. You just have to figure out where you are. Both headphones do a great job with what they've been given. The ethers, I think, they just do better in my personal opinion. And you could say, well, you paid a whole lot more. That's why I didn't pay a whole lot more for the ethers. So that's the thing. I got the ethers for maybe a couple $100 more, but $250 to $300 more than the Neumanns. So it's not as if I'm invested. I mean, yes, money is money, and $200 to $300 is a significant amount. But if I had paid $1,700 with tax and shipping, then you could say you're definitely leaning towards bias. But I didn't pay that. It's a minor difference, really, if you think about it. It's a minor difference of price, and so I don't feel as if I am biased towards the ethers for that reason. And the fact that I'm telling you, I mean, you have to believe me when I tell you that, this is how much more I paid. But assuming that you do believe me, then why would I tell you that? If I wanted to just be biased, I would just be biased. But it doesn't help me to be. I paid for these headphones. It's not like I have to give one back. If I don't like the ethers and Mr. Speakers finds out, then I got to return the headphones, right? It's not that. I bought them, my own money. So I don't know what the bias would be. I'm struggling. An hour into this test, and here's my difficulty. On the one hand, I am trying to justify for Zeos why he felt so compelled to put aside the ethers and prefer the Neumanns. And on the other hand, I am trying to figure out why not justify the Neumanns over the ethers. And they're not they are mutually exclusive things in my mind. Here's why. Let's start with my position first. Let's start with the second first. The second part, what I said was, why not justify the Neumanns over the ethers? Well, that's a good point. Do they both sound good? Yeah, they both sound good. I've already told you the shortcomings, in my opinion, about the Neumanns. They sound closed off compared to the ethers. Excuse me. They don't seem to reproduce the micro details as distinctly as the ethers do. Their vocal representation is not as sharp or as forward as the ethers. They tend to not have great definition to the instruments. Even though there is separation to the instruments, there's not a whole lot of definition to the instruments. But they're $500 brand new. And they arguably have slightly better build quality. And arguably they're more compact, if that's even remotely relevant to you. So you fold up the ear cups, big deal. Whatever. How much are you willing to give up for less to pay? Are you willing to say, I don't need more soundstage. I don't need more definition. I don't need more natural mid reproduction. I can live with mids that are recessed, scooped out, if you will. Well, if that's the case, then yeah, you should definitely consider the Neumanns, because they are $1,000 less than the ethers brand new. At least $1,000 less. But on the other hand, and this is the con, now we go back to the Zeos position. I cannot explain why Zeos says that the Neumanns are his now go-to headphones. What the hell is he talking about? Now look, I'm already irritated with Zeos for his shilling. He is shameless. He is shameless about peddling items and just coercing people in the most base way to spend more money. And he says things that are just outrageous and are patently false. Patently false. Here's what I mean. He talks about how wonderful a set of headphones is, and this is his go-to headphone. And a couple of months later, 6 months later, he will mention a pair of headphones and he'll say, oh yeah, I haven't listened to those headphones in a long time. Well, wait a minute. If those are your go-to headphones, then why aren't you listening to them every day? Why are they set aside? See, that's a bait and switch, what I call it. You tell somebody to trust you. Then you say, this is my go-to headphone. I listen to it all the time. And then 6 months later, you just happen to drop the little nugget that, I don't really listen to these. I haven't listened to them in a long time. I'll give you some examples. The M40X that he modified. How often does he listen to that anymore? Rarely. How about the M1060C I think he had? Rarely does he ever mention it. That it doesn't move from his desk. Or any other number, or the Auteur. I think he has the Auteur. How often does he listen to that stuff? How often does he say, I compared the headphones to the Auteur today because it was important for me to compare it to the Auteur because that's one of my go-to headphones for this reason. He doesn't do that sort of stuff. Now, I'm not trying to sidetrack into ranting about Zeos, but what I do want to emphasize is that for the Neumanns, he was so emphatic. These are going to be my new headphones, and the ethers are going to go and just sit on a shelf for a while. I'm going to listen to the ethers for fun, and I'm going to listen to the Neumanns for critical listening. But why? The ethers clearly, for some very specific reasons, are better. Why should this be concerning to anybody? Well, to you people, my subscribers, maybe it's not concerning and shouldn't be concerning, because a lot of you have said, you take what Zio says with a grain of salt. I'm summarizing, but that's the impression I get. However, why go out and tell people to buy a $500 pair of headphones without actually telling them why it's better than the other one? I just stopped listening to the Ethers because, they weren't as good. That's not an explanation. Now, all you're doing is you're telling people to go and buy something else. You're not explaining to them the pros and cons, the frequency response, the way that they react to particular songs, the way that they reproduce music. And that's the whole point of headphones, the whole point of speakers, right? And anybody can go and say, just buy this. That's easy to do. Zeus does a great job at it. It's a little bit harder to explain why you should go and spend your money. If you had to choose between the two, which one? Well, that's your preference. I can't tell you, once again, I can't tell you which one to take. What I can say is that the difference between the Neumann and the Ethers is not so significant that you will feel as if you are definitely missing out on a huge portion of music if you don't get the Ethers. I don't think that's really the case. As with most headphones, you can only tell the difference when you do an A and B test. How many people said that the M1060C is very much like the LCD2C? That's not the case at all. Those two headphones are vastly different. But if you don't have both of them, you can't tell. You don't know, right? You have no idea. So if you only have $500 and you want a close back headphone that is portable, that is relatively easy to drive, that is relatively neutral, and you can live with the quirk that it does have some recessed mids, that it doesn't really give you the best defined instruments, tones, frequency, then the Neumanns are worth consideration. But I think you can probably find better for less. Now, I'm just guessing here. We're going to do more tests. We're going to compare to other headphones that I have. The D5200, for example, can be purchased for about $400, $500. The D7200s are now coming down in price on eBay. You can buy a 7200 probably between $400 and $500. The M1060, but that's not a really neutral headphone. The HD700, you can find an HD700 now for like $325, almost brand new. That might be worth a look. Now, there's a lot of places you can go, a lot of headphones you can compare it to. But if you're stuck on closed back, unfortunately, you're very much limited unless you go really significantly higher up the price ladder. Or you're willing to live with some of the quirks of the Bear Dynamic headphones, the DT, or the 770, I think is the closed back, which is not a particularly great headphone in many respects. But then you have the M1040, you have the M40X, you have the M60X, you have the M70X, you have some Pioneer headphones. You can probably find a Chi-Fi headphone that will suit your needs for $150 or so. Now, I don't have any of those headphones to compare to directly, but if we're talking about degrees of difference, and there's only minor degrees of difference, let us assume that you think that based upon my review and what I've said, that there's only a minor degree of difference between the Neumanns and the Ethers. Then you can also extrapolate that and say there's only a minor difference between, say, the M40X, the M50X, M60X, M70X, whatever, and the Neumanns. And if that's the case, get the cheaper Audio-Technica headphones then and save yourself even more money. Why not? Why go out and spend $500 on the Neumann with its very particular quirks that I've already noted? Right? And it's probably easier to resell an Audio-Technica headphone than it is a Neumann, because the vast majority of people probably don't know about Neumann. But the vast majority of people probably do know about Audio-Technica M40X, M60X, M50X. Why? Because so many YouTube sensations talk about the M40Xs. And how many YouTube videos have been made about those particular pair of headphones? So I would think it would be easier to resell those than it would be to sell the Neumanns. But that's just, I guess. I'm struggling. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, if I'm really struggling to say, you should definitely buy the ethers. And I don't tell people to buy things, but the ethers are definitely better. And if I'm struggling to say that, then that's a positive remark towards the Neumanns, and it should be. But that's not really my struggle. That my struggle is not the Neumanns are almost the same as the ethers. They're not, in my opinion, almost the same. I think the ethers, when you do this A and B test, I think the ethers are better in all the ways that I've said so far in the last hour. And it comes down to your preference then. Do you prefer to have my sensibilities the way that I prefer music? And if that is your case, then the ethers are definitely the better option. But if you're the type that wants the other side, the sound signature of the Neumann, or close to it, then the ether may not be something you want to invest in because of the cost. And it's not going to give you what you want. But for me, my personal preference is the ethers all the way. Does that mean the Neumanns are bad headphones? No, they're not bad headphones. They just aren't amazing. Maybe that's the way to put it. You know what? That's what I should say. They're not bad headphones. They just aren't amazing. And Zeos made it sound as if the Neumanns are amazing. They're not. They're headphones. They're headphones that are sold at the MSRP of $500 and are very likely not worth $500. I'm not at my conclusion video yet, so I shouldn't say one way or the other, but let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that I could today give you my conclusion, which I am not going to do, but let us assume, hypothetically, that I were to do that. I would probably say something to the effect of, these are not worth $500. And anybody who tells you to go out and buy these things for $500 is a shill. But I wouldn't say that. I would definitely not say that. Because it's not my conclusory video. And I would never identify the shill that I'm talking about. Who would dare be a shill? Unabashedly and shamelessly, every day, shilling out and telling people to buy products. Who would do that? That's insane. Who would be that used car salesman of headphones? Huh? Nobody. Okay, that's it. I thought this was going to be a shorter video, but it turned out I was a little disappointed with the Neumanns and with the way that Zeos had pumped them up. I was expecting for it to be a much closer fight, and it wasn't. And I think that the ethers simply do a better job. I wish, I feel like I should have ended this video about 15 minutes ago. And you probably think this video should have ended 45 minutes ago. Or an hour ago. Because you want shorter videos. I'm trying to figure out what my struggle is. What is it that makes me keep coming back and not turn this off? Is it my irritation with Zeos and his commentary that you should definitely buy this, or this is the best, blah, blah, blah? Is it with my own particular expectation of how this should go? What am I frustrated with? And I don't know. I really cannot say at this point. I'm a bit disappointed in the Neumanns. My own particular, I wasn't expecting them to blow the ethers out of the water, but I was expecting them to an extent at least not be so obviously less than the ethers. But the soundstage is simply not there. The micro detail is not natural. The vocals are not up front. That's disappointing. But they're still good headphones. If you like their particular soundstage or their sound signature, they're not bad. They're just not worth $500. But rarely is anything ever really worth its MSRP. Let's be honest. Okay, that's more than enough. 1 hour and almost 17 minutes. So thank you so much. Thank you so very much for being my subscribers and chiming in and having conversations and giving me hints and tricks and suggestions. And that's very helpful. And I truly do appreciate it. For everybody who commented about my request this morning regarding the Neumann versus ... question mark. What other closed back reference neutral class headphones should I compare with? I appreciate everybody's input. I think I am probably going to go with the Ollo, O-L-L-O, I forget, S4R, which is the closed version. And one of the things, and maybe you want to check this out, one of the things that compelled me to do it is just their very good reviews throughout the internet when they are reviewed. There's not a whole lot of reviews. But also, their FR graph, it seems to be rather flat. And if that could be, I was saying the other day, is there such a thing as a truly flat headphone? Is it possible that the Ollo could be a truly flat headphone? I don't know. I have no idea. That's number one. Number two, they were at a discount on their own website. Number three, they're shipping within a week. Number four, they're hand-built. Number five, they have a 30-day return policy. And number six, you can pay in installments through PayPal. You don't need a credit card. No interest to worry about. If you want to pay with installments, you pay €99, which turns out to $115. Your first payment, and then you pay about €11, which turns out to be, I think, like $14, $15 every month for 12 months until it's paid off. I mean, the company owns the headphones. So if you default, technically, you have to give it back. But, that's not a bad deal, right? Anyway, that's what I'm leaning towards. As far as the Atom Audio SP5, I have to find it at a good price. I'm not convinced about the SP5. I think that there's a little bit of mumbo jumbo for marketing going on, and there's not enough legitimate reviews of that headphone to buy it, especially not at the MSRP. I am not going to do it at that. Unless I find it for about $200 cheaper, it's probably not going to happen. As much as I want to praise Atom Audio for all their speakers, it's tough to jump on in at their first foray into headphones, especially when they're teamed up with a separate company. And then it's almost like they're asking the other company to design their headphone, and they're just going to stamp their name on it. At that point, why not just get the other company's headphone at cheaper? Right? That's my concern. All right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful Friday evening. Thank you so much. This has been probably my longest video. I'm so sorry if you feel this has dragged on, but I wanted to do a thorough examination of these two headphones. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments. Tell me if you agree or disagree with Zeos or me. Maybe you don't agree with either of us. That's fine too. Leave a comment, and thank you so much. I have 74 subscribers now. That's really great to know. And I hope that the channel will continue to grow. Tell your friends and your loved ones, maybe even your enemies. I don't know, if you want to torture them, this would be a good way. Have a wonderful night. Thank you once again for your subscriptions.